Hello, Business 630 students. It's Professor Hassey again. This is week 2, Friday update video, going over a couple of important things to note from our studies of this week number 2 entitled Capital Valuation, Time Value of Money, Bonds, Risk and Return, leading into our discussion next week of stocks and our first case study next week, which will be posted on Sunday, November 7th, and is due Sunday, November 14th. And I'll explain some of the case details in my weekly video on Monday. Today is Friday, November 5th. One of the things that you'll be getting this video is on Saturday morning because this is rather late on Friday evening. So I'll post this on Saturday morning. So I apologize for being just a tad late this week and posting my Friday video. One thing to note in our important dates, and this was pointed out to me in our Thursday evening student hours, is I made an incorrect date on the due date of our case number 2, and I have corrected that. Case number 2 is due on November 28th. Originally put down as November 25th. That is incorrect. Case number 2 will be due November 28th. Just make sure I correct my mistake on that one. But this week, this Sunday, you'll be getting case number 1, which will be an APA format work, and it'll be talking about the first couple of weeks of our course, doing some interpretation and analysis, including the company that you selected in week 1. So be that as it may, let me just talk a couple of highlights of this weekly video and a couple of key points. I wanted, first of all, to talk about the article that I had you read for this week. These first couple of weeks of our corporate finance class, this fall 2 session, is to get you back up to speed on the definition of finance and the reason why we study finance. And one of the reasons why I gave you this article is to talk a little bit about the details or the micros of finance, the capital asset pricing model, the efficient market hypothesis, all that sort of thing that drives investors, that drives companies to make investors happy, to provide them with a return on their investment, because corporations need capital, all right? Because with that capital, you produce and purchase assets. Assets produce revenue and expenses, which provide profit and cash flow. It's from that cash flow that you pay off the investors, all right? And capital or financial management is a balance of short-term and long-term capital. We need capital for day-to-day expenses, accounts payable, payroll. Some of that is supplied by our cash flow of our operations. Other sources of capital for short-term capital is lines of credits at banks, that sort of thing. Then we need long-term capital, which is long-term investment in assets that produce returns over many years. Major capital projects, which we're going to spend a lot of time in a couple weeks on in this class. The financial statements tell the investors, tell the market how we're doing. Are we making substantial profits? Are we producing adequate cash flow? What's the debt position or leverage of the company? All this equates to what the article was talking about, is how finance is changing, how the public or the markets perceive business different now with the globalization of the economies, with different ways of acquiring capital, with different needs and expectations of investors, and how that's beginning to change, and how we as financial managers have to understand that change and risk in the market. One of the big investment vehicles for individuals over the last couple of years has been indexing, or ETFs, where you invest in the market. Where I don't trust my judgment to pick Apple computer, I will go with whatever the market says is doing well, and that's why you buy an index. It equates exactly what the market is, the index. Usually that means it has a risk of a beta of 1, average risk, but it gives you the conservative investment where you don't really have to worry about losing too much money. You might still lose money, but you'll lose money if everybody else loses money. You'll make money if everybody else makes money. That's safe for a lot of investors. A lot of 401ks, a lot of IRAs are index investing because it's safe. Well, what about investing in individual companies like Apple? What are their profits going to be? What about the relationship of your investments of debt and equity? Should you own bonds? Should you own stocks? All of this is going to be part of our discussion in case number one is how do we measure and how do we understand that? Well, one of the key tools of doing this is the value of money, understanding present value and future value. And we talked a little bit about that in our Monday video of this week. And it's the present value or the value of money or the value of capital is determined by three things: the dollar amount that you're managing or what you're trying to find out, the interest rate of either the cost of the money or what the investors expect to make as a return, and the length of time it involves. Naturally, the longer an investment is out there or an asset is out there, the interest rate is going to be different than a more shorter term investment, where the rates are a little bit different. And it's a constant struggle in financial management is to understand which rates are most attractive, short term or long term. And that's when we go back to the article that we were just talking about. One of the interesting things about finance, like everything else these days in November of 2021, everything is changing. The pandemic changed a lot of how we perceive ourselves as workers and employees and managers. The state of the globalization of the economy has changed how we accept risk in the market and how money is transferred amongst all different countries. The state of social issues, political issues, nationalism, racism, diversity, all has changed our concepts dramatically over the last few years. Every election is a crapshoot. Who's going to win? Who's going to lose? What does that mean? It's creating a lot of uncertainty in our investment lives, in our management lives, and in our relationship lives with the people who we work with. Everything is changing. And the same goes through in finance. You know, we developed these theories after World War II, the capital asset pricing model, that everything is based on market risk. You have a risk of the market, the risk of the risk-free market, you have the risk of the individual company, and you measure that risk accordingly by the risk of the company, basically known as beta. We'll talk a little bit more about this next week. But that has changed over time with the changing values, the changing interpretations of investors and companies, the increased technology. You can get up every morning and put on your cell phone or turn on the internet or turn on your cable television or turn on your satellite and get the latest up-to-date of everything. Sports, finance, banking, relationships, good God. It's all there for you through Instagram, through social media, through all the cable outlets, everything. You have a vast amount of information. That technology has changed us. It's made us paranoid in some respects, but also as it increased our awareness of what's going on around us. And that makes us a little bit more sensitive to all this information and how it affects our investments and capital management in companies. This is changing dramatically year in and year out these days. And how this has changed finance, I want to show you a little video about this now.
Spent 5 years dwelling on the old financial system and trying to fix it. But this week here in Oxford, I've been at a conference at the Saïd Business School which is looking at the future of finance. It's fascinating. There's a whole new economics growing based on how people actually interact with each other rather than on maths and equations, and it implies a whole new financial system.
Basic principles are starting to come out of the work, including a need for designing robustness into the system. We can't prevent future crises entirely, but we probably can make the system more robust the way engineers make bridges and buildings more robust in the face of shocks. Second, to make them more adaptable in the face of change. We saw with tremendous innovation in the financial system that the regulatory framework was not able to adapt and keep up. And then third and finally is a financial system built taking into account the real behavior of real people. So understanding how consumers and banks actually behave, and constructing a system built for that rather than some idealized world.
Technology and disintermediation have allowed all kinds of new forms of finance. Think of standalone payment systems on your phone, or of crowdsourcing for loans. But can we really leave all of this to the market? Shouldn't government be giving this a nudge? Emma Bartolomei has produced her own map of the new finance.
The market is creating a solution, and the market is creating an alternative financial system, and the people are working out there in order to come up with new forms of finance. You can call them financial innovation, but I know that this is not such a nice concept currently in the way people are perceiving things, but it is innovation in financial services. And I believe that invisible hand is already there and is already creating a different system, which intrinsically it's more stable than the centralized one, because it's an ecosystem-like.
But there are still a lot of problems. Big banks are well entrenched, and oddly, they are even more entrenched now than they were before the crisis.
I think that the very large banks that we have today are no longer adapted ideally to providing the services that they provide in a risk-adjusted, cost-effective way. But the reason that they exist is through a series of probably unintended consequences. They profit from an enormous subsidy in terms of the cost of the credit and capital that overwhelms the disadvantages of the complexity and the additional risks of the complexity that these large institutions incur. If you take away that massive incentive to be large, maybe mitigate against it if you can't remove it, and then I would say I would definitely agree and highly endorse a vast liberalization of the ability to create new banks. I'm not saying, and by the way, I don't think anyone could set up a new bank and tomorrow have a $10 trillion balance sheet. But you can set limitations both in terms of size of balance sheet, complexity of offering that are scaled, that allow for a lot of innovation.
This is all very exciting, but will a new atomized financial world really work? Don't we need to talk to each other? After all, even JP Morgan himself said that trust was more important to him than all the bonds in Christendom.
We have introduced a code of ethics. It does include the equivalent of a Hippocratic Oath. The Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment in this country have actually introduced an examination, a compulsory examination, by the way, in ethics and ethical standards. And among other things, it includes penalties and exclusions for those who breach this.
Something is happening, and the old model, which doesn't work, needs to change. That means that we need to start experimenting with new models now, and that, of course, entails the risk that things will go wrong. But the way to proceed is to start building now and to correct mistakes as they arise, not let the new institutions get too big to fail, just like the old ones were in 2008. This is John Authers for the Financial Times in Oxford.
So the world is changing. And one of the reasons why you're attending MBA school is so you can be prepared to handle this changing world as a manager, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as an employee. And for you to be able to think and understand the world around you and prepare strategies and reactions and changes to your philosophies of running your particular business or your career. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this with this article, with this video, how I want you to think in this class, this session. Think as managers, think as investors, think about the world around you, how everything is constantly changing, especially in 2021 and going forward. Our health, our social issues, our political issues, our investor issues, our management issues, our supply chain issues, everything has directly affected how we manage capital and how we try to provide an adequate return in the risk environments of the world around us. One of the advantages of investing in bonds is because you get, as an investor, guaranteed payments. You know exactly when you're going to get paid your interest. You know exactly when you're going to get paid off at maturity. That's what makes bonds so attractive. It's conservative. You understand when you're getting paid. And that's why it's an attractive thing for management, for financial management. You can set your cash flow requirements knowing when you have to make the obligations of that liability. That makes it very attractive. And if you have a poor credit rating or have to invest in junk bonds with higher interest, you still know when your payment schedule is going to be made. That's the advantage of it. Also, you get a tax break. Interest rates paid on bonds is tax deductible. Whereas stocks, our topic for next week, chapter 7, is, I call it, in some respects, the Darth Vader of investments. You have no idea when you're going to get paid. Yes, you have a historical track record of dividends or return on investment in the market, which is given to you by the beta calculation, which is given to you by return on investment, but it does not guarantee the future. With bonds and debt financing, you know the future. With stocks, it's an unknown. But that's why the returns are usually greater with stocks. And as we know, stock market has been up this year, 2021, heading into the final 2 months, up about 21, 22% this year. Bitcoins are up 112%, cryptocurrencies, whereas bonds are only up about 2 or 3, 4%. Why? People are still taking advantage of the risk in the market and investing in equities and other types of investments. Well, how does that mean for if I'm a financial manager or a manager of a business or seeking capital? The market is for sexy investments, IPOs, new issues, new risks. But how does that parlay into the long-term side effects of your company? You need to make sure you can guarantee capital return to your investors and provide assets that guarantee growth for your business. That mix of that relationship is very important. And this sets the tone for our corporate finance class in November of 2021 as how we, as students of finance, as students of business management, how can we take all these technology, social media, all this data, and apply a more human function to understand what we need to do? As the gentleman just said in the video we just saw, ethics is very important these days. We hear about it every day with diversity, sexual harassment, equal pay in the workplace. That also plays a large part in capital management. So as we move forward into our first case this weekend, I want you to think about how you gauge the world around you personally. What's your career going through these days? Is there upheaval in the company you work for? Are you still not satisfied with your career? And how does it relate to you as an investor in the market? Or if you were running a business today, how would that influence your role as a manager? There's a lot of discussion in finance and financial management these days about coming out of the pandemic and getting back into the trenches and really getting to know and being reactive to your employees. Not just being a manager on a Zoom conference call, but really getting involved with the employees to get them feel comfortable to come back to work and work in this new environment of the post-pandemic world. So as we move into week number 3 and start talking about equities and do our first case assessment, case number 1, I want you to think about all these thoughts of where we stand today in our financial management world. That's what that article was about. That's what this video is about. And that's what I want you to start thinking about as a way of interpreting the topics that we discuss in our cases. So I conclude this Friday video with just a thought. One of the key reasons of why you're probably going to MBA school is because you want to be a leader. You want to be a manager. You want to be a business owner. You want to be an investor. You don't want to depend on anybody else. You want to set the strategies. You want to set the decision-making. In order to do that, you have to understand the world around you and also understand the factors and the risk involved in that world and how you manage those risks accordingly. So think about that as we head into our third week. And again, I hope you're getting some value out of these lectures. Remember, we have two videos a week. We have the Thursday night student hours, which some of our students have been taking advantage of. And I think it's helped them understand the course a little bit better. So as we head into week 3, again, thank you all for participating. Some of you I haven't really seen too much of yet, but hopefully with the case being published this week, I'll be able to be in contact with some of you a little bit more. And again, I urge you to ask me any questions or concerns you have going forward with our class. So thanks, everybody. My next video will be this Monday, November 15th. And we begin our first case assessment this week with case number 1. Until then, adios.